In the spring of 1829, a man working the rough fields near the border of Delaware and Maryland guided his horse across the soil when the ground suddenly gave way beneath the animal. The plow struck a hidden chest buried in the dirt. When the wooden lid cracked open, the farmer froze in terror. Inside were human bones, yellowed with age, a skull fractured by violent force. That single discovery was not the end, but the beginning. Over the following weeks, more hidden graves surfaced, and each grave carried the same dark message. At least 7 people, including 3 children, had been murdered and buried in the shadows of that land. Their deaths pointed to a figure whose name was already whispered with fear across the Delmarva Peninsula, a woman called Martha Patty Cannon. For nearly 20 years, she led one of the most feared criminal networks in American history. Historians later named her Operation the Reverse Underground Railroad. Her gang kidnapped free African Americans and escaped slaves and forced them back into bondage in the Deep South. Yet trafficking was only part of her story. Patty Cannon killed without hesitation. She eliminated rivals, silenced witnesses, and destroyed children who might expose her crimes. Court documents in Sussex County indicted her for 4 murders, but witnesses claimed the number rose above 20. Some said it reached into the dozens. Before I reveal the full story of this woman and her reign of horror along the Mason-Dixon line, I want to ask you something. From which place are you watching or listening right now? Drop a comment with your city or state and let me know how far the shadow of this history reaches. Do not forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because these stories matter and deserve to be remembered. That grim discovery of bones in 1829 unraveled a network that had thrived for decades without fear of punishment. It thrived because racial prejudice and legal confusion protected it. Most of the victims were people whose disappearances carried no weight with white society. Their voices went unheard. Their absence went unnoticed. The region where Patty Cannon built her empire of cruelty was chosen with precision. At the time, the land known as Reliance sat at the junction of 3 jurisdictions. Sussex County in Delaware touched Caroline and Dorchester counties in Maryland. Criminals who stood on that land could step across invisible borders and escape sheriffs who had no authority on the other side. The place was remote, isolated, cut off from the wider world. Locals called it Johnson's Crossroads after the tavern. That became headquarters of the most notorious kidnapping ring in American memory. Dense forests of pine and oak blocked the horizon. Swamps and marshes made pursuit difficult. The Nanticoke River wound silently through the region, offering cover for boats transporting captives in the night. Roads were crude cart paths, muddy and slow. Towns stood far away, separated by days of riding. It was an ideal stage for a woman who thrived in lawless frontiers. Patty Cannon arrived in that borderland around 1790. Records suggest she was born around 1760. Perhaps under the name Lucretia Patricia Hanley, though her origins remained cloudy. Some said she was born in Canada and moved to Delaware at 16. What history records clearly is her marriage to Jesse Cannon, a farmer with modest land near the border. They had at least 1 daughter. Neighbors described Jesse as a quiet man who kept to himself, raising corn and tobacco. His house stood on a plot that straddled the line between Delaware and Maryland. This detail, seemingly ordinary, became the foundation of future crimes. The Cannon home looked like any other 2-story wooden dwelling of the era. Yet soon secret chambers and hidden cellars were carved within its walls. Those dark spaces would hold the cries of kidnapped people chained against their will. While the surface showed a quiet farm family, beneath it grew a monstrous empire. The early 19th century was a period of turmoil in the story of slavery. In 1808, Congress banned the importation of slaves from Africa. But cotton was exploding. across the South. Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia needed labor for endless fields. Prices for enslaved men and women soared. A healthy adult who once cost $300 could now sell for over $1,000. That price rise turned human misery into a fortune for those willing to kidnap and sell. The invention of the cotton gin had transformed the Southern economy into an endless hunger for workers. Free African American communities in Maryland and Delaware lived in constant fear. After the Revolutionary War, many had been freed either by law or by individual acts of manumission. They farmed, worked as laborers, or practiced crafts. They were legally free, but far from safe. They could not vote. They could not serve on juries. They could not testify against whites. They were required to carry papers proving their freedom. At any moment, their status could be challenged. Their disappearance drew little sympathy from white authorities. For Patty Cannon, this weakness was opportunity. She proved that evil does not recognize gender or boundaries. Neighbors said she was nearly 6 feet tall at a time, when most women barely reached 5. Her voice was deep, her temper explosive, her strength unusual. She towered over her world like a dark shadow. In 1826, her husband Jesse died under circumstances many believed were poisoned. Widowhood gave Patty control over land and property. By then she was already building the network that would make her name feared. The border region lacked strong law enforcement. Local officials were corrupt or powerless. Communities were scattered, and people minded their own business. Suspicion rarely turned into action. That silence became her shield. Her transformation from rural widow to ruthless mastermind began with her daughter's marriages. Both married men who were already kidnappers. Her daughter wed Henry Brereton, a blacksmith who moonlighted as a slave catcher. He traveled widely, giving him cover to scout victims. In 1811, he was arrested for kidnapping, but escaped jail. Shortly after, working with Patty and an accomplice named Joseph Griffith, he murdered a rival trader called Rigdal. They plied him with alcohol, robbed him, killed him, and buried his body on Cannon land. Brereton and Griffith were captured and hanged in 1813. Patty escaped punishment. That crime marked a turning point. Murder became part of her trade. Later, her daughter married Joseph Johnson, a man who brought structure and scale. Johnson owned a tavern planted exactly on the Delaware-Maryland border. One room stood in Delaware, another in Maryland. That tavern became both a legitimate inn and a secret prison. Travelers ate meals upstairs, while kidnapped people languished in hidden cellars below. If Delaware sheriffs came with warrants, suspects could step into Maryland rooms and claim immunity. The building became fortress, warehouse, and meeting ground for criminals. Beneath the floor's secret tunnels, barred rooms and iron rings chained victims in the dark. The gang around Cannon and Johnson was mixed in race and background. White men like Henry Carr, mixed-race decoys like John Purnell, even enslaved men forced to capture others. This variety was strategic. African American gang members could approach free families without raising suspicion, while whites handled sales in the South. Purnell, described as light-skinned, played multiple identities. He moved between communities, sometimes pretending to be a free man of color, other times acting as a white trader. His shifting face allowed him to lure victims who trusted his appearance. By the 1820s, their network stretched from Pennsylvania to Louisiana. They supplied buyers in Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia. In Philadelphia, Mayor Joseph Watson noticed alarming disappearances. He investigated and traced many back to the Delmarva region. In 1825 alone, he documented dozens of kidnappings tied to Cannon's gang. Victims were carefully chosen. Young adults fetched the highest prices. Children were valuable for years of labor. and families were shattered with ruthless calculation. One of the most haunting voices came from Lydia Smith, a free woman of 25. She was kidnapped in 1825. Court testimony revealed she was kept chained for 5 months in Johnson's Tavern. She recalled hunger, darkness, and the constant fear of being shipped south. She was seized on a road near Philadelphia by multiple attackers, blindfolded, and transported in a wagon. When she reached Cannon's property, she found herself locked in a hidden room where dozens of others wept and begged for freedom. Chains clanged in the dark. Food was scarce. The air stank. Hope faded with each passing day. Her rescue came only through Watson's network. Smith revealed how the gang stripped victims of papers, destroyed evidence of freedom, beat those who resisted, and gave false names to prepare them for sale. She exposed the inhuman machinery that turned free men, women, and children into commodities. Audience, imagine walking alone, believing yourself free, only to be dragged into a wagon and vanished forever. How would you feel if no one searched for you, no one asked questions, and your entire life was erased by a gang working in the open? Leave your thoughts below, because stories like these remind us of the fragility of freedom. Local communities. Knew. They saw wagons at night. They heard whispers. They suspected, but they looked away. Merchants sold supplies without asking questions. Some neighbors gave information about potential targets. Corrupt officials ignored crimes. That silence protected Cannon's reign. The gang also targeted white victims when profit demanded. Slave traders carrying cash vanished. One from Georgia disappeared in 1820 with thousands of dollars. He was last seen at Cannon's Tavern. His horse was found in her possession. White men with money could not vanish unnoticed. Their deaths brought heat, suspicion, and investigations. Cannon's greed blinded her. She believed she was untouchable. By the mid-1820s, pressure mounted. Mayor Watson offered $500 reward for information. Governors across states began to cooperate. Dissatisfied gang members whispered to authorities. Escaped victims testified. Cannon answered with more violence. Witnesses were murdered to silence them. Her paranoia grew. She trusted no one. At the center of her world stood a boy named Cyrus James, bought as a child, raised in her household, forced into crime. He lured others into traps, watched murders, carried bodies, dug graves. He lived as tool and victim both. He later described watching Cannon kill children with her own hands. He helped bury them. He carried the weight of horror daily. By 1829, his conscience broke. He decided to speak. That choice set the stage for the downfall of Patty. Cannon. In early 1829, the walls of silence began to collapse. Cyrus James, the boy who had lived inside Cannon's household for years, decided to reveal everything. He had no reason to trust the law, but the weight of guilt and the endless nightmares forced his decision. Captured while attempting to flee, he faced execution, but instead he gave investigators the secrets buried inside that land. He described bodies hidden in wooden chests, children killed to silence their cries, traders shot during supper, and women chained beneath the earth. His words guided officers to graves. They dug in the soil and pulled bones from the dark. Each skeleton confirmed his testimony. A garden yielded the body of a small child. Another chest revealed the bones of an adult. Evidence spoke louder than any denial. For the first time, officials had proof, not rumors. They had bones, boxes, and witnesses. Listeners, imagine the horror of standing in that field while shovels scraped wood and skulls rolled into daylight. Can you picture the silence that followed each discovery? That silence was not peace. It was dread. The crimes were too many to count. Sheriff Joseph Houston of Sussex County led the search with help from Maryland and Pennsylvania officers. This cooperation was unusual for the time. Borders once shielded criminals, but now they became meaningless. For the first time, Cannon's network was treated as interstate conspiracy. Warrants allowed excavations across her property. No hiding place. Remain safe. Each grave added weight to the charges. On April 3, 1829, James was officially interrogated. His words painted a full map of 2 decades of crime. He described taverns, tunnels, chains, escapes, murders, and buyers stretching from Pennsylvania to Louisiana. He spoke of infants killed, of teenagers beaten until they accepted false names, of traitors robbed and buried. He revealed where the wooden boxes lay, where the tunnels led, where the captives had wept. His testimony became the backbone of the case. By April 13th, a grand jury of 24 men in Delaware delivered indictments. Paddy Cannon was charged with 4 murders, but investigators suspected the true number reached into dozens. Charges included the death of an infant girl, a young boy, an adult man, and another child. Each carried the penalty of death. Attorney General James Rogers took the case. He understood this trial was historic. For the first time, a white woman would face execution for the murder of African Americans. Evidence was undeniable. Bodies, testimonies, and confessions left little room for defense. Still, Paddy Cannon herself remained cold, fearless, almost amused. At nearly 70 years old, she sat inside Georgetown jail with iron bars reinforced for fear of escape. Guards doubled their watch. She spoke openly about her crimes. She admitted to killing at least 24 people. She talked of murder as if it was business. She described children beaten and buried with the same tone one might use for cattle. Officials who heard her words were shaken. Hardened sheriffs who had seen countless acts of violence were disturbed by her lack of remorse. Imagine sitting in front of a woman who calmly described strangling a child because that child cried too loudly in the night. Can you feel the chill down your spine? That is how her jailers felt. Newspapers carried the story far beyond Delaware. Readers in Baltimore, Philadelphia, and beyond followed every development. Crowds waited for trial dates. The court planned to begin hearings in late May. Spectators expected a spectacle, perhaps the most significant prosecution in Delaware history. But the trial never came. On May 11th, 1829, guards entered her cell and found her dead on the floor. The cause was poison. Some said arsenic. Some believed sympathizers smuggled it to her. Others thought she had hidden it for months. She chose to escape justice on her own terms. She robbed victims' families of the satisfaction of watching her face execution. Her death shocked the community. Officials had prepared for weeks, yet in one night it ended. Still, the investigation continued. Without her, many details of the gang's operations remained mysteries. Surviving members fled south. Joseph Johnson vanished into Alabama or Mississippi. His brother Ebenezer disappeared with him. Lawmen tried to pursue, but distances and jurisdictions made capture impossible. Only Cyrus James remained, and his cooperation saved him. Recognizing his forced servitude and the risk he had taken, the court granted him freedom. He was relocated to Pennsylvania, where abolitionists helped him begin a new life. Some say he later aided the Underground Railroad, guiding enslaved people to freedom using his knowledge of secret networks. The numbers tied to the gang were staggering. Historians estimate between 500 and 1,000 people were kidnapped and sold by Cannon's network. The profit reached millions in today's currency. Yet beyond numbers lay human tragedy. Families torn apart, children stolen, spouses separated, lives erased. The geographic scope stretched from New York to Louisiana, showing that Cannon was part of a larger system of trafficking that thrived in the shadows of weak law enforcement. Her death ended her personal reign, but not the memory of what she had done. She was buried without ceremony in the jail yard. Later, her remains were moved to a potter's field. Her skull was displayed for decades, a grim relic passed between institutions. Even in death, she disturbed the living. The town of Johnson's Crossroads changed its name to Reliance in an attempt to escape the stigma. Yet whispers of her crimes haunted generations. For abolitionists, her case became proof of the corruption and cruelty of slavery. It showed that free African Americans could never be safe, while the system endured. It fueled arguments that the entire structure of bondage was rotten. Historians continue to examine her story as a lesson in how criminal enterprises flourish when prejudice and jurisdictional gaps protect them. Listeners, what do you think? Do you believe the full truth was uncovered, or do you think more graves still lie hidden beneath forgotten soil? Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe justice was truly served when she chose poison instead of the gallows? Her story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. Evil is not confined to men. Evil is not bound by gender. She demonstrated that cruelty can wear any face. Her crimes also remind us that silence allows horror to thrive. Neighbors knew. Merchants knew. Officials suspected. Yet action came only when white traders were killed and money was stolen. The lives of African Americans alone did not stir urgency. That truth cuts deep into the history of the nation. Remember also the courage of those who resisted. Lydia Smith spoke despite trauma. Cyrus James broke free from psychological chains to reveal the crimes. Their voices carry through time. They gave testimony so that the forgotten could be remembered. If this story has given you chills, share it with a friend who seeks hidden history. Press like to support more stories that uncover America's darkest past. Subscribe with the bell icon so you never miss what comes next. Because in the next story, we will enter another forgotten chapter where shadows linger and secrets wait to be unearthed. Until then, remember the lesson of Patty Cannon's Reign of Terror. Evil grows strongest where silence reigns. Only by speaking, remembering, and confronting the past can we stop history from repeating.